so I'll call our meeting to order. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Roberts? Here. Commissioner Huntosh?
Here.
Commissioner Finneman?
Here.
Commissioner Lorge?
Here.
Commissioner Erickson?
Here.
Commissioner Husnick?
Here.
And President Bain.
Here. I'd like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Members of the EDA, we have an agenda before you this evening. I will entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve. I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? And agenda's approved. Dan, just quickly, we're missing a mic up here. If we can,
Oh,
I can just use it.
yeah, you can share. We're
buddies, okay,
we're working to get that all fixed, but right now we're.
okay. Next item this evening, Headwaters Expo study. Dan, you want to kick this off?
I will. President, members of the EDA, tonight we have Jeff in person tonight, so we won't have any technical difficulties with his presentation tonight. Jeff is from Expo, and he's going to present an overview of their proposal for the Headwaters 123. If you recall from the last meeting, this is sort of the first text-specific study that we're looking at doing for the Headwaters parcel. All of the other studies that we've done to date have been really designed so they can go for any type of development that takes place in that parcel. This one is very much in the pocket of technology. This is basically looking at it to see how does this site work for tech? Does it meet the criteria for data center development, for technology development? As part of their study, they'll look at the utility and fiber network that's currently available to the Headwaters parcel, and then also to determine the potential size of a data center that could develop on the site, and then also look at the financial modeling for it. And then once it's all completed, we will be able to use the results of that study to better market the parcel. So we will be able to take kind of the results back from the study and then use that in marketing of the site for technology use. This is being introduced tonight as a possible project for fiscal year 2022. So we're looking at not doing this right now, but probably in 2022. And with that, I'd kick it over to Jeff to introduce himself and go through his presentation on the Expo study.
Great, thank you, Dan. Good evening, everyone. Is my screen visible on your screens?
It will be in a moment.
It will be in a moment, okay. So I'll just give a little background while it gets there. So Expo Consulting, we have been around since 2000. We do what's called data center lifecycle management and assessments all across North America. They range from initial studies such as this, looking at economic development, sites and areas, do they make sense for a data center, all the way through to assessments of current data centers, helping clients find a data center site, such as a site that you have, through to implementation, drawing, design. We are not an engineering firm, so we don't engineer. We are simply an advisory firm for our clients to help them find and understand their data center metrics and what they're looking for from a data center. In addition, there are also technology sites. So we have a lot of technology companies in this market and region, from the Medtronics to the 3Ms to others that would have an interest in that. We've worked with many clients here in the Twin Cities. Some of the larger ones that we've worked with on data center assessments and strategies include Cargill, US Bank, HB Fuller, on and on and on, and multiples of those, so that you would know. I also speak frequently at some data center events around the country. So Data Center World I speak at virtually every year. Critical Facilities, which is data center technology and healthcare organizations and others. And a multitude of AFCOM events, which is the facilities group that really works with engineering, mechanical, and people designing data centers. So what we're talking about here is how do you identify a site for a tech model, for a data center technology model. And it is completely different than a strip mall or a warehouse or an industrial site. When you get into looking at the site, data centers require some significantly different criteria. Power and cooling are what people think about, but I'm going to talk about 6 or 7 different other areas that are relevant. And you want to make sure that the site that you have meets this criteria, or you're going to spend a lot of money and a lot of time marketing, and it's not going to go anywhere. If the criteria matches the site, and this is where we work with different people, so we have done this for a site at the City of Centerville as an example, and we actually presented that site on a national webinar on their behalf. Their site became very profitable and very solid for a data center. So that was just recently in this last year that we performed that, and there's interest in it from that perspective. So the goal is to look at the site and determine, does this make sense for a data center? And when we're finished with our deliverables, we hand them over to you. So you have marketing materials, you have materials to respond to RFPs for those people inquiring about a site for data centers, and you have detail down to financials, taking into account things like the state incentives, the local incentives, and other incentives that relate to data centers specifically that we put into the study. So what it does is it basically moves you to the top, because if you have this information complete and the data center people are looking and you provide it and the other 7 people do not, they already know where they're a fit for you. You've done half their due diligence for them, and it moves it along. And that's what really we do to help people with the data center side of it. We do literally hundreds of data center assessments like this every year. So it's something that we have a lot of history and a lot of information on. So that's a background. Let me just jump a little bit into it. So these are the different areas that we typically look at when we look at a site. We're going to look at the demographics of the area. So, and I'll show you a slide of what that includes. We're going to look at the cost of power and network. And one of the things that people talk about, just to be upfront, is people look at the cost of power in Minnesota, I'll say, oh, the power in Minnesota is more expensive. The reality is it's more expensive at a raw number, but by the time you take the state incentives and put them into place, it actually becomes more cost effective than a lot of other states. The problem you have is somebody who's not from here and doesn't know the incentives, they look at the gross number. When we finish with the study, we have the net number and they can see what it is. So that's something that has to be explained to other commercial real estate people and other people that are not familiar with the state of Minnesota incentives. Facility capabilities. What size facility can go on the site? Where does it fit? And there are things with a data center you have to realize. When a data center is designed, it's going to have critical facilities in there. It's going to have healthcare, it's going to have banking, it's going to have insurance, it's going to have financial. It might have public sector in there that have CJIS and IRS criteria. So as you start to look at all of this, there's other physical security things. So it needs like 150-foot standoff fencing all the way around the facility with a gate, a fenced gate in order to have access with security guards. So it's not just, you can't just plop it anywhere on a particular site. You've got to look where it is. It has to have power coming from 2 different directions. It has to have network coming from 2 different directions. So those are the things that we look at to make sure the site has the capability of providing that type of redundancy. Disaster avoidance is a big one. In this market, there's not a lot that we have to worry about from disaster avoidance, and I'll talk about what that is. Tax structure and incentives, I'll get into more of the details. And the last thing I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you an example from another site of the financial impacts and why the site was a good site for a data center versus if the financials don't work out, why it's not a good site for a data center. And we have had some turn out to be not a good site. So rather than spend all the money and go into it, they switched and they decided we're going to do multifamily housing, or we're going to go do industrial, or we're going to go do something different, rather than continue to pound and pound and pound for a data center that no one's ever going to likely come over there and build. Okay? So demographics. The nice thing about Minnesota is it's a great place to live. The nice thing about this area of town and where you are, it's another great place to live, right? So when you start to look at the things around here, we look at the livability, we look at the type of education, we look at things like the crime rates, we look at things like available housing, the schools. You know, this area is going to score very well. This is just an example chart of another one. The one thing that people look at this, they see an F in a cost of living. Well, the only reason it's an F is this happens to be in a very affluent area near 3 major corporations that were high technology corporations, so their income levels were very high. So cost of living got an F because it was a very affluent area, not because it was a poor or undesirable area. It was a very desirable area. But these are the types of things that we're going to look at and go through it. And some of the things that come into play today is, do you have technology and engineering talent? We have a lot of that type of talent here in this market. Okay, just from the types of companies that are here, just from the type of education we have here, the technical schools, the universities we have, it's all here. Another factor that comes in that's new is remote workers. Okay, so how well does the data center have the ability to provide fiber that's going to allow for a remote workforce? because that is now critical. Everything that you do, so every time you get an email on your phone, every time you look up Facebook on your phone, every time you send a text on your phone, it goes through a data center, okay? So how long could you last if you couldn't get email for 30 minutes? Would you start to panic a little? Everybody probably would, right? So those are things we look at. We need to make sure that there's fiber, that it's redundant, and you don't have that happening, because it's not going to be a good site for a data center. So those are the types of things we look at and we really understand. The other thing is we look at the talent pool. So there are some markets where the talent pool is increasing. There are some markets where it's decreasing and businesses are moving. We are fortunate in this area that the talent pool is increasing. As you're probably aware, the 7-county metro population has grown extensively since 2000, and a lot of technical talent and other talent here. Power and network. So power and network, we can get into a lot of technical and details and things like that, but I'm not going to go down that road. I'm going to talk about it from a business standpoint and a general standpoint. The data network, it's important to understand the providers that are available to the site. So at a first look at the site today, there are 4 providers that are available to the site. Now, when you look at the current marketing of the site, there is a problem though with those 4 providers in that they do what is called trench sharing. So to cut the cost of bringing in the fiber, they all put it in the same trench up 61, okay? If you're a data center, you don't want all 4 in the same trench. If that trench gets cut by a backhoe, all providers are down. They have no redundancy. So what we're gonna look at is, can you bring it from 2 sources? Now there's another source of fiber that comes up 35W. So Centerville has it from the east and the west, which made their site very good. Your site is very much probably going to come out the same when we start to talk to providers. It may not be there today, but it may only be a half mile or a mile to get there, right? So it makes it cost effective. So you're going to want to get buy-in that that can be completed in the future. It's great that there's 4 providers coming up 61 and can go to the site today. It's not great that they're all in the same trench. So that's what we have to look at and we have to identify. But it's very likely that there would be access from the other side with where the site is. We just don't have documentation. We haven't talked to the network vendors to make sure that that is true. We'd have to verify all that. Power is the same issue. You want to make sure that you have power from redundant places, meaning minimally redundant substations. So whether that's north, south, east, west, doesn't matter as long as you can get power to the site from redundant substations. If you can't, and you can only get it from a single substation, there are ways that you can build in generator redundancy. Now you're already going to have some generator redundancy, but you can build in multi-level generator redundancy as well. And the other is to look at the providers. There are probably duplicate providers to the site from a power standpoint in this area. And we start to look at it and start to go through it. At Centerville, they have both Excel and Connexus. So they have redundant power, which is great. Okay? So even beyond redundant substations from Excel, they now have redundant substations, and they have redundant providers, and they have generator. And that's what people are going to look for when they want a data center. They want that type of power redundancy. I already talked a little bit about the cost and the benefits from it. The state has different things where you actually do not have the rebate, or I think they actually even abate the tax on it right now on power for data centers. So by the time you take those tax incentives off, the cost of power is actually competitive within the United States. But realize the average person doesn't see that. They see the cost of power, they see the tax rates, they throw that in, they don't realize that there's abatement for some of those taxes from the state. So those are factors we take into account as we start to put it together and look at the financials. Facility capabilities. So geographical location. You've got a massive piece, I don't remember, is it 100 or 125 acres or something? Where do you put it on there? Okay, and that is critical, because you're going to want to place it in an area within that geographical location that makes the most sense. You may have to berm a certain area if you have residential, because generators make noise, or generators might have to be enclosed in a certain area. So we start to look at the site and we look at the design. Those are things we have to think about, where it is. We look at the criteria of what's around it, and are there any things that might be considered a risk for a data center? So there's some man-made risks that I'll talk about in a minute that could be potentially an issue for the data center, maybe not. Is it dedicated data center access, or is it an office building? So this became a huge issue. Before COVID, nobody really thought about this, even though there's security issues when you have a public entrance and then you have the data center secured inside. But now with COVID and people coming in, when COVID hit, companies could not operate without their data center. So they went to the extreme, even to getting porta potties outside for just their data center people, only allowing access of their data center people to certain areas in the building separate from all the employees with COVID. Because they couldn't afford to have one person in the data center get infected, pass it on to the second or the third, their data center's down. They can't operate without a data center. They can't run their email. They can't communicate. They can't do basically any business if the data center is down. So we have to really start to look at how that all goes together. I mentioned a little bit about perimeter fencing and gates and security access, and you're going to want to have all those things in place because you're going to want to attract those people that are in the healthcare industry that have certain requirements, people in financial who have IRS requirements. If they're pulling tax returns for home mortgages or giving lines of credit, they have to meet certain IRS criteria. So there's other things that come into play. All of that comes into how do you physically protect the data center and how do you physically have access to it, which includes key cards and biometrics and all the fancy things you see in movies where people are putting fingers and reading their eyes. They actually exist in data centers. That's the real thing today. And then there's a lot of related to the data that's in that data center and how it's retained and how it's tracked. And the biggest thing that's growing in data centers today is not servers. So to give you an idea, anybody have their phone handy? Hold up their phone. Your phone has more power in it today than a server had in it 5 years ago, okay? And servers are this big, and your phone at this big now has probably 3 to 5 times the power of that server. So they're shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. And they have servers about the size of a laptop that they can literally cut up in what's called virtualized, and you can get up to 1,200 virtual servers on one server the size of a laptop. So they're shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. They're taking more power. They require more cooling. But what's increasing? Storage. Okay, so the data and the storage is just growing immensely. And I bet if we talked about what is your storage retention policy for the city, is there one, Dan? I don't know. You know, if you have one. But I can tell you, we work with a lot of states, and they keep everything. They have things from 40, 50, 60 years ago that they're scanning and putting, and their storage is growing tremendously. So that's what you have to look at. So the data tracking and retention is a huge issue around the storage side of it when you start to look at the physical design of the building and where does it go. Risks and benefits. So there's some nice fancy colored charts here about tornadoes and storms and all the other things. The reality is we're in a very slight risk area here for tornado or that type of action. We have no hurricanes, we have no earthquakes, we have no volcanoes. You're not going to see lava like we see in Hawaii melting down buildings. You know, we don't have that here, which is great. The biggest thing we have here that's an issue is ice. Not so much snow, but ice. And back in 2006, I believe it was, I could be off by a year, we were working with Carlson Companies on all of their data centers and consolidating them across the country and pulling them together into one here in the Twin Cities. And the substation that they had their one data center through iced up in Plymouth, and it was out for 3 days. And they had no power to their data center for 3 days because they didn't have the redundant data center, and we hadn't finished the study, so we were all in the process of it. Now today they have all that in place, right? But ice is our biggest issue that we have to deal with within this market. Outside of that, I mean, we all know, right? If it snows a foot of snow tonight, by 4 a.m. tomorrow morning, you probably can still get to work. You know, we have a very good system for the snow part of it. It's the ice that creates the issue. A couple other things to look at is transportation corridors and airfields and some of those things and fire station. We look at all of those things as well as what's adjacent to the property. Now the site has a local airport on it, not a commercial airport, and it's at one end of the site. So that end of the site is highly unlikely you're going to put a data center near it. You're going to probably put it on the farthest extreme of the other end of the site if it makes that criteria, because one of the criteria is you need to be a certain distance from all runways and flight paths, okay? Only because airports, there's potential accident. It doesn't happen very often, but if it does and your data center's there, it's a major issue for a lot of people, right? Transportation, you think it'd be good to be near freeways? Well, not exactly. There's a data center, one of the large state data center that we assessed, and we saw where they're building it, and we said they had a freeway and could come right down, trucks could come right down the freeway and literally go right into the building. It was right next to it. And they didn't believe us, and we went in and did the design, and we put in these huge pipes with cement all the way along there. A month after we put them in, truck went down off the freeway and ran into the pipes, and it would have run right into the data center had they not put it in place. So you don't want to be near the freeway. You want to have accessibility like we have here. You're far enough away, but you don't want to be where you can see it, as an example. So that's something that we would look at as well. Why a study? this is a chart that kind of shows you the difference. So on the left-hand side in the blue, you see what people typically look at for a normal building. A building like what you're in here today, a building like for an industrial site, a strip mall. You know, they need land, they need space, they do need network. Everybody runs on internet today. The cash machines are running on internet today, right? When you go to purchase something. They need, you know, power and water, right? For restrooms and people and other aspects of it. But if you start to look at the right, you see all the other things we get into. So when I mentioned the servers are getting smaller, they get very dense. They're very hot. You gotta have specific cooling for them. You gotta have a lot of power for them to run them. You've got to have the physical security we talked about. You've got to have the redundancy of multiple sources of power and multiple sources of network. You've got to have the generator and the switch gear and all the things to back it up so that if you lose power, you can still run. I just had a call today with another company, and their data center happened to go out. It happened to be it's a university. And the data center went out, and it was in Texas during the cold and ice storm last year, and they didn't get fuel in 3 days. So they had to shut down the university for 2 days, and everybody was working remote. They should have never had to shut it down. They should have had the redundancy there, so we're helping them design that now. But those are things that you have to take into account as you start to look at designing a data center. So all this that you see in the green is what people don't take into account typically from a commercial real estate standpoint. They only look at what's in the blue. And that's what they're marketing for, and that's what they're putting there for. If you can identify everything in the green and put it in a model, and you provide that to someone who's seriously looking for a data center or a technology building, whether it's, you know, a Medtronic that's looking for a technology building, or, you know, an Abbott or a UHG or whatever, they're all looking for that type of thing. Now you're giving them the information they need up front, and it makes it a lot easier to convince them to come and take a look at what you have. If you only give them the blue, you know, you're 1 out of 10 and you might get thrown out. If you give the green, they're at least going to call you. They're going to come talk to you, and you can start to engage that conversation. So that's the idea behind this type of study. Financial incentives. So the financial incentives in Minnesota, they're probably, I think they're one of the best in the country. They're definitely very good when we compare around the country. Now I have a little bias because I was on the group working with the legislature, some of the key people to get these incentives in place initially. And the first pass of it, the legislature wanted it to be 100,000 square feet minimum and a $100 million investment. And we argued and argued and argued, and I'll give you a great example. We had finished an assessment for US Bank, 49 data centers around the country. Those 49 data centers and all their servers would only fill up 10% of the 100,000 square feet and 100 million. United Health Group would only fill in 10%. You could take the 10 largest companies here and they wouldn't even fill a building that big. And we kept telling them, you're way out of line, you're too big, it's never gonna happen. It went 2 years and they came back and then they listened and we readjusted it. And we got it down to where it's reasonable. And the biggest thing in the incentives that we were able to get them to understand is it's not just the incentive for tax rebate on the power in the building, but it's on all the compute that goes into that building. So you think about the cost of somebody putting in 20,000 servers. Those 20,000 servers might cost them $20 million, and they refresh that every 5 years. Well, we do that here. We give the tax rebate on those servers. They don't do that in other states. Indiana is the only one that is now starting to copy us. That is why when this bill first came out, you've got Stream, you've got UHG built their own, Target built their own, Google came to town, you've got Flexential, you've got OneNeck that expanded, you've got DataBank that came to town and is now building their second data center here in town. All those people came within a year because of our incentives and because we offered those types of incentives. And you had companies like US Bank, Health Partners, and Medtronic that were out of state with their data centers that brought them all back here because of those incentives. And we wanted to keep that business here, right? We want those people to stay in town. So these incentives are real critical. Now, I'm oversimplifying this because they're not that easy for people to understand, right? When you start to apply what qualifies and what doesn't qualify and what's capitalized versus operating expense and how do we get it and where it is. But since we worked on that as a company and we helped the state work through all that legislature, we understand it. And we know how to apply it. We know how to put it in place and put it into numbers and show the difference. So that's what this chart shows here. And I don't want you to get wound up in all the numbers and the figures and everything here. There's 2 or 3 that are real critical to understand. Obviously, the bottom line, the return on investment down there, this particular site, this is a site in Minnesota, it returned 49% to the investment, okay? There's a lot of people that would take 49% return on their investment right now. Most data center sites traditionally are 20 to 25, maybe to 30%. So this site was like way up and above. Don't expect that yours will come in at this, okay? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But this was very obvious choice for a data center site. This is very obvious that you should be looking at this. And when data center providers see that, that's what they want to see. Now, the other line to look at here is right above that, it says assumed MRC per rack. That's monthly revenue per rack at $1,500. And above that, you see the monthly cost per rack at $1,007 or $1,008. So if I'm a Target or I'm a United Health Group and I'm going to go build a data center, I want to know what my cost is to run it on a metric of a per rack. So the rack is what all the servers are put in. So you can put 1,200 servers in a rack. And you can see here that $1,007 was the cost per rack. So Target or UHG is looking at it's $1,007 for me to build that data center and put it in the rack based on the scale. Or if I'm going to buy that service in the market, it's $1,500 to buy the service. Now, small organizations, something the size of your organization, is not going to get the scale of a UHG or a Target or a US Bank and get that, $1,007 cost. You're going to be $1,500, $1,800, maybe $2,000 just because you don't have the size and scale to build up a big data center. That $1,500 is very competitive, but that $1,500 also means that the Flexentials, the DataBanks, the Streams, the Unisys, all those that come into town can be profitable, but yet also make a very good rate for people like yourselves, the people that are going to go into this type of data center, the local companies, the regional companies, even the sub companies. US Bank, Medtronic, and Health Partners all went into a provider at the $1,500 rate because it was easier to have them manage it and it was still cost effective for them. These types of financials here, without me getting into them, really identify the overall market rates and the long-term cost and the benefits of a particular site. This is what they're going to want to see. They're going to want to see these financials. The other thing is, you can see the growth. If you look at the total facility space there, which is under the space computations line, we started with just under 20,000 square feet, but this one could have 4 what we call data halls added onto it to get up to almost 200,000 square feet. So this is a long-term thing. They're going to invest the money to build 20,000 square feet to start, and they're eventually going to build all these halls and get up to that 200,000 square feet over time. So they're not going to leave your site when they have to expand, and that's one of the keys. And your site has enough acreage to expand. The question is, where do you put it? And how do you put it? And how do you lay it out? And where does that other fiber come from? Can we get more power? Those are all the unknown questions today. We have to figure that out, and that's what we would do in the study for you. Okay? So, stop there. Any questions that you might have?
Members of the EDA, any questions you may have at this point?
I would ask a few
Yes.
naive ones because the technology is well beyond me. But so we have a group doing marketing right now and has been for a while. I imagine you will or already have interfaced with them at some point in time. They have a specialty in dealing with data centers, so they've earned some information out there already. They've been short whatever additional information you can bring to the table. So now we're building up this story so that no one's going to really be seeking too much additional information. We have a marketer out there. He's going to be fortified with what you've done. And we should now be able to say nothing else is needed. If we don't fit, we don't fit.
Correct. But and I'm assuming you're referring to CBRE and Dan Peterson, is that
Correct, yeah.
correct? So I know Dan very well. We work together on projects and other things. So what they're doing is they have a format that they do, right, as a commercial real estate, and they take it to that one level, and they do have a data center entity, and they can talk about data centers. They don't go to the assessment design level and financial level that we do. So they've used us to do this in some, we've worked together on projects together. So what we're doing is we're taking it to that next level to help get to the right people. That's the idea behind it, right? So when people see your study, we have people that, I'll be upfront with you, we have people that call us at Expo and say, we're looking to do another data center. Where have you done a study? They want to see our study. They don't want to waste their time, and nothing against Dan, what he does, it's all great, but then they know they have to do all that work that we've already done. So if there's one we've already done, they call us. And we have other commercial real estate people that want our study to show the people that they have that have an interest.
Okay, so After this, though, no other studies need to be taken. We'll just wait for the marketplace to tell us where we stand.
Yeah, you shouldn't need another study, and you should be attracting those people. They're still gonna come in and, I mean, they're gonna come in and do their own due diligence. They're not gonna just take our study for what it is. They're gonna go look at it, but we've done 50, 60, 70, 80% of the due diligence for them. So now they're more checking than they are doing the due diligence to do it,
Yeah.
which allows them to come in quickly. So, of the 5 or 6 providers I mentioned, 2 or 3 of those people hired us to do this before they came here. So, and they use us in the same capacity.
When you make your determinations about the size of the data center, and then think about it in terms of multiplying its scale 4 times or whatever it might be, are you also making judgments about the balance of the site, or are you making no judgments about the balance of the site?
We're only in the respect that we need physical security, we need certain parameters around it, we need certain access to it in those areas, right? So, you know, we're gonna pick out what we think is the best area on that site to put this. We're not concerned about the rest of that, other than we've got that security around that data center with enough buffer zone and other zone for the other components of it.
Okay, and the other components are the money-making entities that would nestle into that same environment. And that's how we think of the rest of the property. We think of it as a tech park or something like that. It
Correct.
essentially is responding to this nucleus item, which is the data center.
Yeah, and it's gonna draw those people in. So without giving away too much information under non-disclosure here, UHG built their site right next to where Medtronic put theirs in. Health Partners jumped in next to Medtronic. US Bank jumped in next there, and then US Bank built another data center right next to UHG's facility. So that one facility with the power and everything in there and the sites, all of a sudden snowballed into 4 others, 5 others. So that does happen.
Well, my only real hope here is the final story about when all the information's available, and we've made it as easy as we possibly can to understand what this particular site can do, and we've judged it relative to our competitors out there in terms of what they can do. I assume that's what our marketing people in some ways will be doing as well, but you wouldn't necessarily do that. You're just providing background information. That we will truly understand where we fit in this marketplace, because you know, we've gone down this road for a while and we'll continue to go down for a while.
Right.
And we're investing to say, this is what we want. And at some point in time, we've got to be able to see some real rationale
Yeah,
there as to whether we
some
found it.
return.
Yeah.
Right, you need some return. Yeah, and that's why we provide all the materials to you to go to your marketing and to use those materials. And that's the idea. We don't just do the study and now you can look at it, it's nice and pretty. We provide it to you in formats where you can take the charts, you can take the information, you can take the financials, you can take all of those things that I just showed you, and you can put them into your marketing materials. And that's what people do with it.
And I think if I could just interject, add onto that comment is, one thing that we looked at too is when you talk about these projects, speed to market's a big factor in making decisions too. How fast can you go from concept to in the ground and get it built? Having a study like this eliminates some of that initial sort of conversation back and forth. Can the site handle this? Can it do this? Is there power there? We have that, you know, sort of at the 20,000 foot level for the site in general, but this gets us down to that ground level, that granular level. So if we're meeting with the group, we can say, here's your fiber options, here's your power options, here's the preferred location on the site, which then gives, you know, when they're doing their due diligence on the site, we're, you know, miles ahead of other sites that they may be considering, which gives us a better, you know, a better position in the market. So to your point about other studies that are needed, you know, there's always, when you look at development, there's always going to be an ask for other studies, right? There's always a million types of studies that you can do on parcels, but this one, from the tech standpoint, will address 90% of what we need to make sure that this actually markets properly for technology and data center development.
And the other point to kind of go a little bit with your question too, the reason we did 3 different sizes when we do the assessment, we build the sizes, the first size could be for a local company, right? A local or regional type company, that's how big they want to build. The second size would be like a regional or even maybe a national company. And the largest size is attracting your global companies, right? So there's a lot of Fortune 500 companies in the Twin Cities. That's the largest that's going to attract that. This assessment is not designed to attract your 5 really big people, your Google, your Microsoft, your Amazon. Those people, they got their own way about doing it. They're going to go pick the sites, and they just politely beat up people to get the cheapest, lowest cost they can get anywhere. We're not trying to approach them. There are 5 people out of 10,000s of others out there, right? We're going after the other 9,995. That's what this study is about. It just doesn't make, doesn't make sense to do this work to go after those 5 big ones. So, they all have their own way of doing it.
I have kind of a piggyback question to Mark's question. So if I understand that there's 2 different deliverables as part of the proposal. One is a smaller, it's smaller in price, so I'm assuming smaller in scope, the site assessment, and then the second is the model. And I just want to make sure I understand that. Is the site assessment the initial assessment of, do we have any red flags or things that would make this unattractive? And if there are, do you stop at that point and not continue on with the financial analysis of just saying, look, this just
Correct.
isn't going to work? Is that
That is correct.
sequence?
So if we immediately come in and we look at that site and it's like, we already know by looking at this, the first 5 things, this isn't gonna make sense. We're not gonna go do all the other work with you. It just doesn't pay to do that, right?
And the engagement is set up that way that
Yes.
there's gates, right? So
Yes.
if we pass through first gate, then go on to the second,
Right,
more
we can
detailed
do it that
deliverables.
way. We call
Okay.
it phases,
Phases,
but we
okay.
can put phases into the agreement for you in that manner if you would like, yes.
Understood.
Mhm.
Thank you. And I think that would, just to provide feedback, I think that would be important. We know certain things about the project or the site, but obviously not to the level of detail that you know. And if there's some fatal flaw, we would rather just have that pointed out. And again, in my perspective, no value at that point on doing deep, incentive analysis or deep financials on something that's just going to be a non-starter from the get-go.
Correct, we would agree the same way.
Yeah, perfect.
We are right up front with people when that happens, and it does happen occasionally. 'Cause it's not,
That's why I was curious about your interface with the marketers, because let's say you get that first phase done and you've come to a decision. It's viable, it's not viable, however that goes. You're able to feed the marketers then with whatever information you have. They can make a judgment about the actual marketplace. I'm concerned about the actual marketplace because I don't know who's going to come this way. And what actual area we're competing against, the whole of the Midwest or just the 5-city territory that we've been talking about. And are we successful within that territory to know that we can achieve something? So the marketers then get a shot to test the marketplace based on what they know halfway through, and then if they need to know more, if that's not answering the questions, they come back for the final statements then.
usually you're gonna wait until the complete study is done because things can change as we get into the details once we determine that the site's viable. So you're typically not gonna use the marketing material then at the expense of publishing and putting things out because there are parts that will change when we get into the details. So that's really how you go about it. And from a marketing standpoint, we're marketing Centerville nationally. We did a webinar. We had real estate people from I don't remember how many it was, a couple hundred people were on that call from all over the country that are data center specific people. And we aren't those people, Expo is not, but we know those people, so we invited all those people to that call, right? And on their behalf presented a presentation just like this over the webinar to attract people.
So the site being viable is an empirical judgment, and it's your judgment about the marketplace. It's viable or it's not viable, and we haven't really tested the marketplace at that moment in time.
It's a factual document with all the facts that say this is viable for a data center or a tech type of company. That's what we're doing. We're making sure all the pieces for what they're gonna look for are there. Or maybe it's 29 out of 30 are there, or 28 out of 30, and here's the 2 things that you wanna look at that you're gonna have to address, but still 20 out of 30, you'd wanna market it for that. Or we get through and it's 20 out of 30 say you shouldn't put a data center here on the first pass. We're not, obviously it'd be way before that, but you wouldn't pursue it then with the extra work and pursue the market for data center or technology.
I'm interested in the contracting relationship between your firm and, let's just use the Centerville example. Is that a follow-up engagement where you are actually added by contract as part of that engagement team in a broader scope than what we've proposed today? I'm just interested in how, yes, if we move forward with the study, that's great, but it sounds like there's also a broader role for somebody with your expertise to be more as part of the site marketing team. Is that a separate engagement, or what is that? How does that relationship usually how do you typically work with clients over the life of that
Right.
relationship from initial study to what's needed follow-up?
So there's some logistics legally that gets into that because we're not real estate people.
Understood.
We're not commercial real estate, so we have to be careful how far we go and where we go. So what our role would be to connect you with those people that can take your marketing directly to their buyers. That's kind of our role. That doesn't mean that the Minnesota Tech Corridor and City of Centerville put together their marketing and they had us review it. So we reviewed it on their behalf for accuracy to make sure everything was correct and it was ready to go. So we'll do that as part of the study of
Understood.
this.
Okay.
But we bring those other people in. We are not going to sell or market the site on your behalf. We can't legally.
Understood. So
So
you
from
are
that
providing subject matter expertise on on the topic at hand to supplement what is being the legal service that's being provided by the commercial realtors. Is that
Correct.
an accurate
Correct.
assessment? Okay.
And
And
the
that would be an
webinar-
additional scope outside of what has been proposed
Correct.
today? Okay.
So like doing it, if you want us to present this as a webinar and bring in 200 commercial real estate, yeah, there might be a minor fee for that, to do that webinar with your proposal. And then we also will send out and market to those 200 commercial because we know a lot of them,
Understood.
right? And we'll attract a lot of them to come look at it that right now don't know who you are. That's the kind of the side benefit of it.
And then, is there also room for, or do you have a role then when we do have an interested party doing due diligence, do you provide some level of due diligence assistance as part of I would assume another statement of work, but is that an additional service that you provide as well?
Yes, and it's some do it their own way and some want us to do it with them. It really depends on the party that's there. So
Understood.
if it's some of those people that I already mentioned that had us assess in this market, I guarantee you they're gonna call us and say, okay, you did the study, tell us about it, what is it, we want this more detail from you, right? But they're gonna pay that, not you.
Understood, okay. And we don't need to go into this level of detail tonight, but at some point, I would just like to better understand how do we contractually manage that relationship, recognizing that you are a subject matter expert that could be contracted by either buyer or seller, and just want to make sure we've got that.
So we're
We're
not
clear on it.
contracted by, so first of all, we would sign conflict of interest and non-collusion agreements with you. And I didn't say this up front, but Expo only does assessments. We do not take any fees from the sites or from the realtors, none of that happens, right? We're here on your behalf to look at your site and look at the factual information and put the study together, right? So we don't want to be, we're completely third-party unbiased,
Understood.
okay?
That's kind of what I was getting at.
So
That's
we
good.
wouldn't cross over to that site, we would tell you who they are, but we're not gonna go work with them because this guy's gonna give us a fee or more of that. We don't play that game at all. And we sign with a lot of public sector people like yourselves, you know, the non-collusion and conflict of interest, because if we're doing the study, we shouldn't be bidding on the end product, right? That's a conflict of interest, and we do that all the time.
Yep,
We
that-
stay out of that.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. That was
Yeah,
part of just
I didn't-
understanding how these work, how these relationships worked, so
Right.
helpful.
So our agreement would be with you to assess your site, to help provide the marketing, the materials that you can send to your marketing, to put it together, send it out, and help connect you to the people who can connect you to the buyers. That's what we do.
Members of the EDA, other questions we might have for Jeff and or Dan? Jenny,
Yeah,
go
I've
ahead.
got a couple general ones. On the redundancy of the fiber optics and the power, I assume that's something you do first, because if that's kind of a no-go, it's a moot point, is that correct?
It's a yes and a no. So you do an initial phase of it to make sure that there are potential opportunities and options for it. But the final part of it comes out when you actually do the data center design, because we have to be able to do a mock design that can fit the redundancy of it on the site. So there's pieces that have to come together at the end. But if there is no way to, we know that we're only gonna get these 4 fiber up 61, and we're not gonna have any access from anybody else, yeah, then we'd be sitting down with you and saying, do you wanna do this or not? Here's the risk you have, right?
The access from somebody else, who pays for that? Who pays for the physical laying of it and putting it in?
The fiber providers will do that. So the Centerville site, there's fiber providers are on one side, and when they heard it was a data center, because data centers use huge amount of data and network, there were other fiber providers that were right away ready to come in on the other side. If you build this, we'll come in on the other side during construction. So they put that in. Now, there's some things where we are here, and this geographic is good. If you're in St. Cloud where it's granite and you're gonna try to pull fiber through granite, it's a whole nother cost structure, right? Where here we have a lot of sand and clay, it's not that big of a deal to pull fiber, right? So there's other factors on that geographical thing that we look at and you take into account to fully answer your question a little more.
So then in the timeline of things, I have if the fiber optics have to be laid for, say, half mile or a mile or whatever it is, what is the lead time that you have to build into the proposal, or if somebody wants to build a data center? How much in advance, or what's the lead time on having that done?
So the real answer depends on which fiber provider it is. But remember, what we're doing is we're doing the model. So we just need to know, how much does it cost you to go a half mile to pull the fiber and put the fiber in, and how big is the pipe you're gonna put in, and what's the cost of that? That's all we need for our model. They're not actually doing the work. They'll do the work when somebody purchases the data center, wants to build it, and then it's the data center purchaser that has to work with the fiber company to put the fiber in and work with any potential costs from that standpoint. So we're just getting our cost to pull a half mile, a mile, whatever, from those fiber providers for the model.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? I do have just one more. So in your incentive analysis, does that include recommendations to the city of what the city should expect of asks for incentives? You talk about incentives at the state level. Does that typically include local incentives?
Yeah, so we'll talk through, that's just a discussion of what others have done, what others haven't done. It is your decision to do it.
Of course.
I'll be honest, most of the city incentives, you don't have to give in much, number one, because when you start to look at what your incentives are, they're minor on the rounding errors of what we're talking about here compared to the millions of dollars the state's already giving. So the state has done a good job to overshadow what county and city and local need to provide. It's more talking about how quickly you can get them through your process, right? Or if you have to do site evaluations, or if you have to do these certifications, or that's what they're gonna wanna see. How quickly can I work with you as a city? That's what they wanna know. And how easy are you to work with? That's, when the people get involved, that's what they want. They don't want a lot of the red tape and all the other things, right, to go through. They wanna work with somebody that can get it done easily and quickly. Now, they understand there's legalities and other things that have to happen, and certain criteria around it, and there are regulatory issues or other things you have to follow, but they want to have somebody that's easy to work with. That is a big criteria for a lot of them. That's why you see these in pocket. If you go search for where the data centers are in some cities, you'll see they're all here in this one city. Why are they there? That city was easy to work with. It wasn't based on the state incentives because they could get it anywhere. It was somebody that was really easy to work with, was the bottom line.
Any other questions? This was incredibly helpful. Thank you, and apologies for the technology challenges
no
2
problem.
weeks ago. So glad we could come back even better in person. So thank you for spending the time. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you everyone as well.
And just for just transparency, Dan, you mentioned that this would be considered for a 2022 project. Is your thought that this comes back for consideration early 2022?
I'd have to take a look at where we are from a budgetary standpoint in 2022, but yeah, I'd probably be back some point in, I don't probably say it wouldn't be right out of the gate in 2022. There's some other things that we have to take care of logistically just from a work planning perspective, but this would be coming back in 2022 as a possible option for the EDA to consider for a study. And some of that also is looking at, can we partner this with, are there other funding opportunities for it to help buy down the cost for the city too, for the EDA as well. So when it comes back, it'd come back sort of with that complete package of, what's our contribution? Can we, potentially get a CDA grant to help cover some of that cost? Are there other partnering agencies within the tech quarter that would potentially kick in as well to sort of not help buy down that cost of the study? But at some point, I don't want to say, when I say 2022, it's not going to be mid-year, it'll be between mid-year and the start of the year.
Understood. Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you all for taking the time.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item this evening is the Chamber of Commerce BR&E update. Dan, do you want to kick us off before we transition over to Nanette?
I do, and President, members of the EDA, if you recall, last year, we entered into a one-year agreement with the Chamber of Commerce for services related to the city's BR&E activities. During the meeting tonight, we have Nan from the Chamber of Commerce here tonight to provide just a verbal update on the work that has been completed to date. Part of the reason why we have it on the agenda for this evening is during the November EDA meeting, we'll kind of reevaluate the contract since the contract that we currently have does expire at the end of the year. Want to reengage that conversation in November to see, do we want to continue on with that contract for 2022? Do we want to make any changes of that to the agreement that we have? But prior to kind of opening up that conversation again on that agreement, wanted to at least provide some background in terms of what work has been done, so we have a little bit better picture as to what we've gotten for our investment, in 21, and help make that decision for what we do moving forward with this BRNE agreement with the chamber. I did tell Nan not to provide a written update tonight. This is just going to be a verbal update. There is a written report that is a part of that agreement that we have. That'll be turned in by the end of the year. So there's still a couple of months left to get that completed. But wanted at least a verbal update tonight to help sort of color the conversation for the November discussion on the future agreements. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nan for an update.
Fantastic. Well, greetings, President Bain, EDA members, and city staff. I do appreciate the opportunity. It's been good to look back over the last year and see the efforts that we've been undertaking. I will let you know that in your packet there is the BRNE agreement, and so it might be helpful for you. I'm going to address section 3, and I'll identify the different categories, A, B, C, that I'm addressing. And then when I think if it's okay with you, I'll just pause briefly between each section, and if there's a question, because there is a number of them, if there's questions or something that you want clarification on, I'll pause before I move on to the next. Does that work? Okay. All right, so section 3A, the Forest Lake Area Chamber of Commerce has not only acquired a list of businesses in our service area, but also sent a direct mail piece to that list to advise the recipients of the county grant programs late in 2020. And I'm also actually in the process of accumulating another listing from the Washington County Library as we speak. Straightforward? Okay. And then next, B and D, section B and D. The Forest Lake Area Chamber has been providing both businesses and residents with a variety of resource information on events, location and relocation resources, referrals, and business startup guidance on a regular basis throughout this last year. This includes fielding calls from the general public as well. I do also want to note that the startup inquiries, there's been more than normal this year, and what I've provided for them is a resource document that was created by Open to Business, Dan Undum, and myself early in my tenure here at the Chamber. Okay. Section C, the Forest Lake Area Chamber provided input and participants for the most recent EDA surveying efforts, of which you know, and is currently in the process for a future needs assessment survey to businesses as we speak, meaning it's live right now. And I look forward to sharing the findings of this information with you before the year's end. Okay, section E. We have been advocating strongly for small businesses on both a county and state level more than ever this past year. The Forest Lake Area Chamber has and continues to partner with the Minnesota Chamber to be sure that the needs of our businesses are heard at a state level. The Forest Lake Area Chamber was also asked to give input with our partners at Washington County in regard to the FAST grant program late last year, which we also did. Our current surveying efforts will also help us to identify if there are resources available to meet the needs of these anticipated by our local businesses as they move forward through their healing process. F, the Forest Lake Area Chamber of Commerce publicly promotes Forest Lake businesses in their social media, member mention postings, and also the postings of the city of Forest Lake, those pertinent announcements, as well as these are basically around arts in the park or downtown planning efforts. And I think I just posted in another one today about sometimes there are road closures from the police department, things of that nature. So again, just trying to keep that information front and center to the public. In addition, similar information is shared regularly through the Forest Lake Times, which we do monthly, and our Forest Lake member e-news, which is done weekly. Our member software integration also was completed this summer, which feeds and fuels our website. This platform provides a community events page and a news page, which is gradually building momentum as a source of expanded information for the public. Now, G, we have continued to do business visits monthly to engage and perform ribbon cuttings. Each month, our ambassador team has visited either virtually or face-to-face 2 to 3 businesses each month, and 75 to 80% of these are located in Forest Lake. I will say that one of our most recent visits was met with high accolades from the marketing team as being the best grand opening experience they've had company-wide, and they are a national company, so I felt good about that. We also provide business-to-business networking opportunities to both our members and non-members 3 to 4 times each month. I, the Forest Lake Area Chamber of Commerce, has enthusiastically participated in the downtown revitalization efforts to date. We've provided meetings with our downtown specific group, our member meetings, social media and e-news messaging, and I also participated in the vision session. Lastly, we recently engaged, this is not on this listing, this is new, but lastly, we engaged in mental health awareness efforts with the A Path for Hope mental health event just recently this month. This involvement has opened the door for us to work alongside of our community partners that are experts in this area so that we can collaborate on ongoing mental health education and resources for our businesses and our community in general. So with that being said, on behalf of the Forest Lake Area Board of Directors, Chamber Board of Directors, and myself, thank you for your interest and your ongoing support of the work of the Chamber. Any questions?
Thank you, Nanette. That was a very comprehensive list, and I always think it's good to pause and just recognize what's being done and the work that's being done. And as you walk through this list, those are visible things that I see every week, so easy to do. Lots of head nods of yes, check, check, check. So well done, and thank you. Members of the EDA, as we think about the scope of, well, the update provided as well as the scope of work, any questions you'd like to ask of either Dan or Nanette as we start thinking about what terms would be for renewal for next year?
If I could just provide a little bit more background, we intentionally did a 1-year first agreement to sort of didn't want to do multi-year to begin with. We couldn't quite know what that return was going to be on the investment, but as you can kind of see from the list that Nanette gave, you know, it was a fairly robust efforts that were performed the last, 10 months of 21. So again, that's why we did the 1-year term. It was a $5,000 initial, investment that we made. Moving forward, we can look at, is this, again, do you want to do it on an annual one-year kind of contract basis, continue just on a 1-year term, or extend that out to multiple years? Historically, I believe it was done on a multiple year, maybe a 2-year term. So there's a lot of those are the type of conversation points for the November meeting to discuss.
Members of EDA, any feedback on also not just scope of services, but term of those services for future contracts? Go ahead.
I think we've got our money's worth
Yeah,
in the short.
I guess, are we going to, so November comes up, are we going to get an update of where we are with the council and the levy and if it's been received well? I know the biggest thing, we're one of the bigger increases, and so knowing that, I think, is important for me personally to decide what, maybe the funding's more, maybe it's, and so where we're at and getting kind of an update and what going forward.
So you, make sure I understand, you're looking for a broader kind of levy update on what preliminary levy was, what we're expecting December to look like?
That would be nice too, but more importantly, what our
budget.
proposed budget was and how that's been received by council and workshop and all the rest of that.
So Patrick and Dan, great question, and appreciate the broader perspective of kind of how does this relationship and this contract fit within broader EDA
And I was
budget?
hesitant to ask the question now because I know we're on account, on the chamber.
No, but I think it's a timely question, because certainly the December, final truth and taxation hearing and budget adoption is that first meeting in December. And I do think it's a good question, and one that we should, we can certainly provide an update of where we were as far as preliminary levy, as well as, I know there's been some, even in our last council meeting, there were some updates on where those numbers were coming in. And could certainly give an update. Patrick, I'm speaking for you, but does that seem like something we could do?
Absolutely, we can do an update. We have, like you said, changed some numbers, not the EDA levy portion of it. But we have, you know, as we work through and get new revenue numbers from the state and things, so we will have an update by November. November will probably be the last time we'll be able to get close to changing the budget, proposed budget anyway, so yeah, that's not a problem whatsoever.
And just to reinforce, I think most know this, but that number can't go any bigger than what was the preliminary set in September. And I think from the update, we're expecting it to come down by a small amount. Also of note on this topic, we do have the Community Development Director position on tonight's council agenda for approval. And so that was also a big component of overall EDA. But a good time to do a check-in and then kind of bring that back to, of those scope of services, what does that look like for future you know, ongoing, I kind of look at this relationship we have with the chamber as being kind of EDA operation support. And I think what you're getting at is we need to make some decisions or make sure we're keeping in scope specific project work we want to fund, as well as overall operations. And I think good question, and good for us to kind of bring that back in November. And if we could do it that first November meeting, so if there are some asks, we would have some time to turn that around before the December budget final meeting.
Yeah, we will, I mean, tonight with the Community Development Director, we'll see if that goes through. That will kind of solidify what we're doing, I think, with the EDA as far as levy goes and the expenses for next year. I don't see that changing much if that gets approved tonight, so.
And I think just to piggyback off that, like on the granular level of the actual breakdown of the EDA's like line item budget, there was a little bit of some stuff that I had to do some placeholders in there initially, especially like what was left over from the downtown planning. So some of that stuff had to get shifted around. So I can definitely update that initial sort of like line item by line item, you know, list of budget activities and bring that back in November.
So we put the chamber on a one-year term. What historically has it been, the term?
I believe it was a 2. I mean, I have to go back to the original agreement, but it wasn't more than a couple of years at a time. And again, I think I'd advocate for a shorter term just to make sure that as needs shift, you can then accommodate adding additional things, taking stuff off the list. Like, you know, just looking through this initial item here, you know, we're probably not going to be doing extensive BR&E survey work in '22, so it's probably not worth keeping it on the list. But if you get into a 5-year term, you're kind of stuck to that list of deliverables and you're kind of locking it in for 5 years. So, you know, initially a shorter term allows you an opportunity on every other year basis to kind of go through and make sure, are we still in market where we want to be from a deliverable standpoint? But I believe it was a couple of years, 1 or 2 year, or 2-year terms, excuse me.
Do you feel the consequence of a 1 year or a 2-year term? Is it as comfortable to be 1 year versus 2, given the adjustments that can be made?
Yeah, I'm comfortable either way. I think 2-year probably would be the max that I'd recommend, just again, because allowing for shifts in priorities, both from the chamber and from the EDA, so, but not more than 2.
For what it's worth, I would support a multiple year agreement. And like most of those multiple year agreements we do have some sort of a structure for an annual work plan setting where we kind of contract broadly on some large topics and then more specifically develop an annual work plan that would more, you know, specifically each year update. Many of our multiple year agreements allow for some price adjustments if there was needed. So maybe that would give some just overall longer term funding stability to the chamber, which I think would be a nice benefit for both of us, but then also allow for some flexibility. Certainly we don't want to be so locked in that it just doesn't make sense.
So back on budget related somewhat, but as far as, you know, making a decision on the consultant that spoke tonight, we talked about maybe early next year, but we probably need to figure that out as far as a budget, or is there enough room in that? I understand maybe opportunities for other funding, but then there are also some internal questions I have about the site itself, the whole project site itself, that we'd like to discuss maybe on an agenda item if possible in November. I know that meeting could get to be pretty long, but there's just some questions there that internally that I'd like to ask.
And November is shaping up to have a fairly robust, you know, as we get closer to year end, there's some stuff that we have to take care of just from a logistical standpoint. So November is kind of teeing up to be a rather larger agenda, but, we can accommodate what we can within the 90 minutes that we have for the meeting.
Yeah, and if you can provide us with any of those questions beforehand so we can have a good response, or
Sure.
at least a more complete response, that would be appreciated as well.
Okay.
Other points of feedback? Go ahead. Ben.
Yeah, just to give you accolades for the work you've done. We've had a chance to work together a little bit this year, and I know that list you ran through is extensive, so I appreciate all the work that you are doing on behalf of the EDA in the city with the business community, and I too would support a multi-year, especially if we're able to make modifications year to year.
Thank you, Leif.
Other points of feedback, questions? All right. Any other points of feedback, just from a chamber perspective, on things you would like to see future years, or any, I guess, kind of broad comments? I guess I'd welcome any feedback you have.
Yes, I have been forward thinking, as well as some of the things that maybe we would start to address. Now it slips my mind, just had one as you were speaking, but I think when I do the written report, perhaps I'll include in that some of the shifts where we've got time taken away from, like you said, the BR&E survey work, and some of the things that I'd like to focus on. Oh, I know what it was. It was more around workforce and working more strategically with the school systems. So that's one that's definitely top of mind for me.
Yeah, understood. And rightfully so, on top of mind for everybody, I think. Good. Well, thank you for the strong report and strong feedback, and it's easy to just walk down the list and see, yes, we see evidence of those things taking place each week. So thank you for pulling that all together, and look forward to supporting future year contract.
Thank you.
All right. Transitioning on Washington County update. Chris, glad you're here.
Thank you, President Bain and members. Good evening. Just a couple quick updates for you this afternoon. I want to thank Dan, first of all. We're going to be heading down to Minneapolis on Wednesday this week for the Minnesota Association of Commercial Realtors Expo, the MinCar Expo, and that's a big event. There's usually between 500 to 600 people there. There are site selectors, realtors, developers, businesses that are looking to make connections. It's a great opportunity to network and to market the county and the city. So Dan's going to come down with me, and I've got a city council member that's also joining me from Stillwater, and we'll have a booth. So the CDA has a booth there, and we'll be talking about the Minnesota Tech Corridor, about the city, the county, opportunities here, what we're working on. Really a very informal event, but a lot of networking and really a lot of good connections there, so we're looking forward to that event. It'll be Wednesday this week from 3 to 7 p.m. down at the Minneapolis Depot, and looking forward to that. We've been there 4 times now, I think, and had some really good connections over the years. So last year we didn't get to do it because of COVID, but this year it's back on again, and we're really looking forward to networking and to marketing the county and the city. And then one more thing, I want to thank Danette. She has been working very closely with us on a new program that we're just starting to do the planning on, the discovery on. We think we've done really well with the Open a Business program, helping the entrepreneurs and the startups, but we think there's an opportunity to take that to the next level and help those established companies grow. And I think I mentioned a little bit at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about providing peer-to-peer networking, so you can have CEOs talking about hiring issues or training issues or finance issues, whatever the case might be, but there also might be a finance component of that. And we really want to reach out to the business, and Annette's taken that initiative and started a survey. We're surveying across the county right now with 6 different chambers that serve members of the county on a countywide basis to find out what are the needs of those well-established businesses, to say, how can we help you? Not necessarily only from the CDA, but from the chambers individually, and as part of this new network of chambers that we've just created during the pandemic called the Washington County Chamber Coalition. And we're going to be meeting again on Wednesday to talk about that. But thanks, Annette, for putting that survey together and getting it out and getting it started. We're excited about where this might go, but we really need the input of those businesses. So if you know of companies that are in need of help, that aren't entrepreneurs or startups, but it's that next level, it's that second stage level that wants to grow, but that growth might come with a whole new set of challenges, because now you've got to add new employees and you've got to add inventory, and that sometimes it's hard to digest that growth. And so we want to make sure that we're meeting those needs with those companies that are maybe not being met right now in the county, to help them continue to be successful here in the county. And then just finally, I know I've talked about this in the past, but the CDA has an economic development website.
And we've talked about it with the, the COVID relief grants. But if you ever have a business that's in need of help, certainly start with the eastmetro.org website. eastmetromsp.org is the website. And that's a good link for Tyler's services and the other programs that are available right now throughout the county. And there's also good information on there, the deed programs as well. Deed did just close their business assistance grant program using the ARPA money. And I think they had 18,000 applications, and unfortunately probably can only get to about 6,000 of those 18,000 that were applied. So we're gonna have a need, I think, of some more grant money coming up, and so we'll wait and watch and see what the state does first, and then maybe certainly continue to explore the possibilities of helping those businesses that still need help recovering from COVID. And that's all I've got. I'm happy to stand for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions or follow-ups for Chris this evening? Right, not seeing any. I know we don't have a staff update or city update on the agenda. Is there anything, Dan or Patrick, you wanted to add for EDA
Just
this
a
evening?
placeholder for EDA to remember for the November 22nd downtown committee meeting. That should be a pretty robust conversation on, Bruce is hard at work right now in the Bat Cave, as I like to call it, working on the downtown planning. So he's gonna compile all that feedback and bring back, some initial planning stuff for EDA downtown committee review in November. But I do know that 22nd meeting is the week of Thanksgiving, so it's the Monday. So I just wanna make sure everybody's aware that there is a downtown committee meeting scheduled for that Monday.
Go ahead.
So I was going to ask this question. I saw it on the agenda for the city council on the community development. Is that a replacement or a different change of from where Donovan's position was, or just maybe, and maybe I missed the last EDA meeting, so maybe there was an update given on that?
Yeah, that is a new position that will be responsible for the planning and that side, but also for the EDA side. We will retain Donovan's position. It'll probably be called a planner instead of zoning, whatever, but it's an added position to strengthen the community development process that we have, I think, and the EDA process. So you guys will have more attention paid to you, and so will some of the developers. I think it's a good move.
Okay, so is it a vote for that on the agenda tonight, or is that just
It's
discussion?
a vote to authorize the creation of the position and recruitment
Okay.
of the position.
We did, so yes, it creates the position, starts the recruitment process, and we did workshop it in our last meeting just to gain council feedback on position. Piggyback maybe on Patrick's comments, I think if you're looking at, from an org chart perspective, it's a new position, but allows for the new Donovan role to take a slightly different, more targeted role that is not as involved. As you know, Donovan was pulled in many directions, and he was the front lead person for active projects under consideration, and we would look for the new community development position to take the lead on that and be working with the new Donovan position rather than Donovan trying to wear both hats. So
Yeah,
definite headcount, but I think it gives us an opportunity to change and make more specific what we're asking of the new planner position.
It's really a throwback, kind of what we had a few years back, where I thought that model worked well. I think the combination of all of those, the community development director, the planner, and the planning assistant all into one position was just too much for not only Donovan, but anybody in the job to take on. And so this will hopefully have us pay more attention to the development side as well, whether it's the downtown or whether it's residential. And also to the EDA matters, as this committee talked about a few months ago about, do we have enough time and do we have enough staff? And the answer was no. So hopefully this will begin to solve that.
Do you see that interview process being public being involved in that new position at all?
I think we can consider that. I don't know how many candidates we'll get and how we'll whittle it down. We'll see. I haven't even thought about that process yet. So hopefully, if it's authorized tonight, that we will begin the recruitment almost immediately and see what kind of candidates we get, and hopefully get somebody on board for the first of the year and can get going on all the things we need to get going. So
use some asks or thoughts?
Just,
on-
it just obviously it's a key position. I mean, that is the front, and so it's very important, and I think that there's much, you know, hopefully it's a good problem where we have so many people applying for the job that we have to, you know, whittle it down or have a pretty robust interview process to find that right person, so.
Yeah, we will see what the pool looks like and then try to figure out what kind of involvement we can have the community or at least the EDA regarding, even if it's just something to review some of the applications and give us your opinion on those applications.
Thanks.
Other questions? All right, we're at the end of our planned agenda for the evening. I thank you all for the great conversation tonight, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.